Can you all hear me okay? Okay. I do apologize. Public speaking is not my greatest forte, but I'll do what I can to answer your questions and everything. My name is Keith Portugal. I'm with Urban Design Ventures, consultants hired by the City of Oshkosh for your 5-year consolidated plan and analysis of impediments to fair housing choice. I met with some of you along with my colleague John Hagland in September. And could I have a show of hands of how many of you are familiar with CDBG? Great, okay. In that case, I can skip most of the beginning. You're all aware of the income limits, correct, and how that determines whether or not people are eligible to receive CDBG funds. In 2019, for an example, a family of 4, if they had $62,000, they would be able to receive CDBG funds through social services of some sort that the city would fund, or if enough people with that income lived on a certain street, that street could receive CDBG funding for the infrastructure of the street. Oh, sorry, actually. Okay. Last year, you received $835,000 and $154,000. And as you're aware, there are spending limits. You are required to use 70% of your funds for the low-income communities. 20% can be, up to 20% can be used for administrative purposes, and 15% can be used for public services, which can be an issue that we'll go over later. And according to your caper from last year, you spent 35.9% on a project called the Central City Redevelopment, 40% on housing rehabs, 14% on public services, and 9.9% on administration and planning. For Urban Design Ventures, we approach the con plan and AI on a more general basis. We prefer to make it a larger framework so that communities can, over the next 5 years, put their plans, their fixes to within that framework. And over the last few months, my colleague and I, we went over data from the American Community Survey and the census, HMDA data, which is the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act data. We submitted requests for fair housing complaints within the area. We also had various one-on-one and group conversations with stakeholders in Oshkosh, and also made follow-up phone calls as well. And there is a list on pages 12 and 13 of the con plan that has everything, or everyone that we've consulted. The Consolidated Plan, as you all know, is a document for guiding your CDBG funds. It is every 5 years, so it's, as mentioned, we like to have it more general so that whatever comes up, you can apply over the next 5 years. So you have annual action plans each year, which will be more specific. And the con plan is just the general road for it. We write for HUD mostly. That's how we've done things, and we know that they want to know what the residents' needs are and what your goals are to address those needs. For the Consolidated Plan, it must be reviewed by HUD and given their stamp of approval. Within this document, within our first draft, we stated that you do have housing needs, homeless needs, other special needs, community development needs, economic development needs, and administrative needs. The first three would most likely be subject to the public service cap. If you have your 835,000 allotment, then that's around $125,000 just to fit these various needs, which isn't much at all. For the next three, the community development needs, economic development needs, and administrative needs, we just have them as fairly open. So again, if anything comes up in the next few years that you need to address, you're within the bounds of what HUD has seen, and you can say, this is a need that we have identified, and this is something that we can address with CDBG funds. The AI, known as the Analysis of Impediments to Fair Housing Choice, is reviewed by HUD, but it is not it's not something that HUD usually holds you to, like you would the con plan. It is a good measure of where you are because it is, every 5 years you can take a look and compare the documents. And as some of you noted, it is a pretty dense document. We have a lot of information there. And we do try to keep it loose as well. The impediments that we noticed, there is a need to educate more people on the fair housing, provide more outreach within the community. There is a need for more affordable housing, a need for accessible housing, and some changes to public policy within the city. And this is just language that we have from our current draft. I ran through that. I do apologize. I'm fairly nervous. However, are there any questions? Yes.
On the AI,
Mm-hmm.
page 78, they have the itemized list of, on page 78, where we have the itemized list of the LIHTC projects, and I believe that there's a statement that talks about there's not a concentration, but I guess it does appear, I guess it depends on how you define concentration, and I guess maybe if you could elaborate on that definition, because it does appear that we do have somewhat of a concentration along North Jackson Street, and then kind of the second piece is on page 82, where there's reference to the planning and zoning. I think it might be referring to an older zoning code, because I believe that was updated in our rewrite on the number of individuals in terms of family, unrelated individuals. I believe we split that up between the University Transition Overlay and anything outside of the UTO. So those are my two questions.
Oh, okay. As far as a concentration, I would have to take a look at a map for Jackson Square. Maybe look at to a little bit more. As opposed to everything else. Okay, yeah, I will take note of that, and perhaps change the language. And you mentioned page 82. Oh, at the very top?
Yes.
Okay. And you said you have addressed that because of an overlay that you have, and you do have a update on your codes, correct?
Yes, I believe there was a distinction made in our rewrite. So I believe there was a distinction made in our rewrite. We separated out university transition overlay. It was increased to 5, and then outside of the UTO is 3. So I'm not sure if this reference is more of a general reference or it says 4.
Yes, outside of the university overlay, if you have people who are with disabilities and they decide that it is something that they want to, that it's economic for them to gather together as a household, limiting it to 4, I think, is what we're saying is an issue. So if it's, while you may have addressed the university overlay, if it's outside of that bounds, then that might be an issue with HUD, I believe.
So you're saying any number specified may be a problem?
No, I think it's, I think if you just increased it to 5, it would be fine, from what I understand.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, on the analysis of impediments report on page 60, thank you.
Yes.
It's listed as an impediment, the regulatory, or excuse me, the misleading fair housing ordinance. It mentions the city's has an exemption for owner-occupied buildings with 4 or fewer units. It reads as if it's consistent with federal law, but not state law. Just wondering if you could explain that a bit.
This is actually from the previous AI. I had simply just taken it so that it was provided here. This is a review to that information. So I am not sure what they were saying exactly when
Okay.
I put it in.
Okay.
But we do need to do more of an analysis here. That's why it does state insert progress or update. And by the time of this document, I wasn't able to address that.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm. When we came along and spoke with various groups, I guess I'll discuss, more common impediments. So for low-income communities, it's going to be an issue for general cost of living. And part of that is transportation. Whether you have a car and pay for the gas and the insurance and everything else, or if you pay for public transportation. I do realize that not everywhere can have 24/7 public transportation. But it seems like that Oshkosh has done a good job with, not the city itself, but with various groups outside of it, nonprofits, have done ride shares, low cost and very good ways for people to obtain the movement that they need. So I did not include transportation as an impediment based on that, because it seems like it's something that you are working on and doing. I don't know if you agree or not, and that's something we can add on there. Oh, additionally, when I spoke with, I believe, Mr. Lyons, he stated that the city is implementing more diverse transportation avenues. So like the bike paths, which also work for low-income individuals. Obviously not so much in the winter when you don't want to be riding, but it is something that is helping out. There is a perceived homelessness issue, particularly in the lack of a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week, 365-day-a-year shelter. And that is something that we definitely state that the city should address. And another issue that comes to mind that I've discussed with my colleague John is when it comes to disability access and people aging in place. The city does a good job of making everything accessible. However, when the housing stock is really old and people are aging in place, John was saying that the interplay between the public and the current, the current city is great. But I believe he was saying that, or that he noticed that there was still a residual distrust of working with the city. And we believe if the city tried to do more in showing everyone that you're helpful, because you guys are, if showing everyone that you are helpful, that it's easy to address coding concerns and everything, and adding things like ramps or grab bars, or just updating homes so that they are accessible. That could really help, I believe. Any questions on those 3 items that I brought up, or comments? Yes, of course.
It's about the goals on page 86. There's like 7 goals, 86 and 87, there's 7 goals laid out. On page 86 and 87, there's 7 goals laid out. And as I went through both of these documents and wound up thinking that my question applies to the goals, I guess. I have a concern that there are food deserts in Oshkosh, and that is a need.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't see that addressed anywhere in the goals. Maybe it could be under economic development when considering jobs, or, schools were mentioned, green spaces were mentioned, but food deserts weren't, and we do have food deserts in Oshkosh. So I'm wondering if that's a consideration, or...
So a few things. This is a review of your 2018 comprehensive plan. It is not within our goals of the Consolidated Plan or AI. And in speaking with people, that did not come up. So obviously I didn't speak to everybody, and I should have. So I do apologize for that. And thank you for bringing that up. I did notice when driving in for the first time with my colleague that along the main road, there were very few grocery stores.
Correct.
So yes, I did notice that it is potentially an issue, because whenever I come into a community, I look to see if there are sidewalks, if there are bus stops near food places. And yes, that is certainly
Right, especially when
something.
we're considering building, making plans to build, and maybe on Jackson Street or whatever, that when businesses come in, I think we really need to consider and make sure that there are places where people can get their nutritional needs met.
Mhm.
Maybe I'm the only one that thinks that, I don't know, but.
We would have to identify an area within Oshkosh that is mostly low to moderate income, and then CDBG funds could be used in aiding a store. I don't think it could build the store itself.
Right, but maybe give incentives to a business or two to build, to create a market.
I have not seen CDBG used as
Okay.
incentives,
Okay.
but it can certainly help in some aspect of that planning. And I'm not sure where I put my pen, but I definitely do. Oh, actually, never mind. I have notes here. Okay. Any other questions or comments? I'm so sorry that was very quick. Yes.
Keith, I'm not sure if we haven't noted in our consolidated plan for food deserts, but it's a potential that's something that can be noted in there.
Mhm.
As you indicated, this is in the analysis of impediments, and it's from the city's approved comprehensive plan, which is a separate document. So we could easily insert some reference to food desert in the CDBG Consolidated Plan, which is a separate document.
Mhm.
It is included in the sustainability plan.
Yep.
I will make a note of that. Mm.
Just it's kind of a clerical question.
Yes.
So I noticed like in some of the charts in that there's a reference to sources, but none of them have dates. And I don't know if that's because this is just the draft document that hasn't been populated yet. So just a little aside.
Which ones in particular? If you have one that I can take a look at.
So most of the ones I saw had dates for the reference on them. So
If it's American Community Survey, we usually use, or we used in this instance 2011 to
is there
2015,
something?
or 2013 to 2017 data sets. If it's, and that's based on the HMDA data, the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, which was 2011 to 2013, or 2011 to 2015. Although I think they updated it recently, and we could update it for you if you want.
Mostly in the back in the indices, yeah, where you might have the FFIEC.gov or a website. Just noticed that a number of those didn't have reference dates. But again, it could be because there's still not even data plugged into most of the documents. So
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
We're still
Working on it,
populating all
yeah.
that, yep.
Okay.
But just wanted to get everyone's input and feedback on where we are at right now and see if there's other avenues that you would like addressed.
Yes, sir.
Second.
All right. First, thank you for putting this all together. This has been very informative. My question is about in general, the strategies recommended to undertake the impediments. So, for example, impediment for public policy. One such strategy is to revise the city zoning ordinance to include additional definition statements and revisions. Is there more depth to those recommendations in the plan or in the report, or are these just, is this the sort of open-ended nature of the recommendations that you were talking about? Like,
They are more open-ended. However, clearly I have a little bit more work to do, and I can add more to it as well. Yeah, that's.
okay.
Yeah, they're sort of open-ended at this point. They'll make a recommendation of, like, we need to update our zoning ordinance and address areas of concern. And then it's up to the city, with, working with our legal department, to formalize those actual amendments.
Right. I guess are those specific, like, for example, additional definitions, are those, for example, the additional definitions, are those specific terms identified somewhere in the reports, or is it just, like, are we as boards and commissions and things supposed to be identifying those needs and then getting the, you know?
So when I added that in, I think had looked over the code and did not see at least just a definition of the Fair Housing Act. No. Was it the Fair Housing Act? It was that or Americans with Disabilities Act. One of the two. I'll have to double check. But that is something that, we would want to put in. I just didn't specify that in case there was anything else. That was, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Question back here.
On page 39
Of the,
of the impediments of the
Yes,
AI,
sir.
there's the housing profile, and you have that chart that's there. My first question related to that chart is there a reason why you started off with increments of 19 years between each category each year, and then it changed as the categories got newer?
that is simply what the American Communities Survey
Okay.
does. It's just taken from there.
Okay, and the only reason I was interested to see how that broke down in 1980 to 1999 in regards to how that, those areas of growth were, but that's fine. And then I guess my question is, in 2014 or later, there's a 0 there. And that's not to suggest that we have not built, that is to suggest that we have not built.
No, that's,
Okay.
that was the data at the time of the 2011 to 2015 ACS. Those are just projections. It's
Okay.
working from the
So,
census.
so we have
but-
clearly built new housing since then. And
Yes,
this is just not, okay.
I think later on in the AI, I include units authorized by building permits, which should
Okay.
be a little bit more fleshed out.
And then I guess my next question kind of relates to the first impediment, I believe. You'll have to forgive me, I lost my...
No, not to worry.
But I guess it relates to what other examples, it's the first impediment, 1C, not 1C, 1F. It's actually a combination of 1F and 1D. What other examples would you provide as entities and organizations that could exist in the community that could provide fair housing support or legal advocacy support other than what already exists in our community?
Sorry, give me just a moment.
So,
On page 5.
yeah,
Oh.
I'm right at the beginning on page 5.
Thank you.
I know you have the impediments in different spots throughout the document, but this is specifically page 5.
And you said 1D.
1D, and it kind of goes into 1F as well.
Mhm.
I mean, let's just take this from the perspective that Oshkosh is a smaller community in comparison to a larger, broader urban area. What types of examples would you think should exist of organizations that provide fair housing support in our community?
So legal advocacy groups, certainly, specifically for housing, which I think is mentioned somewhere.
We wouldn't necessarily list any organizations or entities that would need to be working with. Other,
We do within the document.
right. But in this first section, just listing the impediment, then later in the document is where the recommendations are. These might be organizations that we could help. So just in the initial impediment, he's just listing what those impediments are at that time.
Sure. No, I get
So-
that. Did you want to? Go for it.
I was just going to chime in. Rental Housing Advisory Board has talked about a tenant association or tenant resource organization. Is that an example of what you're talking about with something like that that doesn't exist in Oshkosh right now?
Mhm.
So that's what we'd be looking for specific recommendations.
Mhm.
Did you? Okay. So recently, the Tenant Resource Center in Madison that served the entire state reduced their service geography to Dane County. In working with our community or other communities in the state, is that, something that should be acknowledged, that those services are no longer available
Yes,
to those outside
certainly.
the county? And then if I could just, page 13, 14, many of the maps, page 80, these are just some examples. Some of the maps are illegible because they reference color and or are so small or blurry that they're just illegible. And I'm just wondering if those are going to be replaced in the final document.
Yes, and additionally, I'll add that to any indices at the end as well, so it's a larger map. Mm,
Sue? We're just wondering, can we switch between documents, or are we staying on one document? Okay.
No. Thank you, Sue.
You're welcome.
I was just curious, a couple things, but we're looking at the consolidated plan. In the section, I don't know, around 30 to 33-ish, where it talks about how housing issues affect racial and ethnic categories, it seemed like all of these charts were not necessarily revealing without having the population percentages. So you can see that 70 individuals who identified as Black or African American indicated that particular issue, but without seeing how it related to the overall population, it just didn't really tell much of a story. It seems right after the charts, then you have a statement that I was surprised you're able to come to this conclusion that none of the racial/ethnic category groups were affected by any housing problems. If that were true, I would say congratulations, you guys have won. But I mean, just my own experience is that wouldn't be true, and maybe there's a need to include in our list of work that we're doing is to further reach out to these groups to get their feedback in greater numbers. Earlier on in the program on page 11, same document, you note that Father Carr's has quite a few beds, but that there's only 25 to 40% that is utilized. And it makes it sound as though maybe there's not that great of a need. So it might be relevant to include in that particular statement, it's the last paragraph, why, or some of the causes for why the shelter is underutilized, because most folks in the field would suggest it's not because of a lack of a need, but that it would be program policies and regulations at that particular agency that are the result or causing the underutilage.
It was not, for that, I do know what you're talking about. I spoke with someone and that's what they had stated, had come to the conclusion to. What you had just mentioned, that it was Father Carr's own policies.
I know you want to be democratic and inclusive and carefully navigating that, but I think if
it is important
if that matters at all how it's worded, it makes it sound like, oh, well, they got a lot of extra beds. Why would we have that as a need?
I can put more emphasis on that.
Also on page 12 then, where it lists what we do have, I thought that it may be pertinent to identify that there is an absence of permanent supportive housing. This is on that first full paragraph at the top where it talks about some of the programming that we do have. I just thought that later on in the document you do cite the absence of permanent supportive housing. I don't know if you include permanent, but the absence of supportive housing as a key cause contributor to homelessness. And so it just seemed to be in this section where we're doing an overview of our homeless programming that, I mean, that's really a serious gap. We have transitional, which is great, and I think it's been expanding lately, but I don't want to hog this. So. Not yet.
Perhaps you could explain additional comment period and what the plan is going forward for public input prior to adoption?
Yeah, so we don't have those dates down yet, do we?
No.
Okay, okay. But yes, okay. So we will we'll put out into, for advertisements, stating that these documents exist, and then we invite people to read them either online or in person, but most likely you guys would do it online because you have a great IT staff for that. Small little joke. Yes. And I think it's a 30-day review period. So tell all of your constituents, anyone that is interested, to read over the document, state which parts you believe require more eyes on them. And we will receive comments. It's something that HUD requires. We definitely need more public engagement. And we can go back to the document and add those in.
Based on this first draft, yes, we're asking you, committee members and council, to provide us with any input or comments, changes you'd like seen, any more items that need addressed by February 28th. So if you can email those comments and suggestions to me by February 28th, that would be great. Then UDV can start working on the second draft and finalizing it more and incorporating any changes that you as committee members would like to see. Can you share your email address? Yes. My email address is dbrandt, BRANDT, ci.oshkosh.wi.us. Probably give it a week or so. Our network is down right now, but
feel free to send them to me as well.
Yes.
Prior to sending off this, or after we had sent this off to Darlene to review and to print out for everyone, I was also working on it, so there should actually be more data, which I guess it doesn't really need more of because there's so much. But I will certainly jump back on and start massaging in a lot of these other suggestions. So please email me with any of your comments that you had from here. I took my notes, but I'm not putting faces to names right now. So I would like that as well, so that we can also have a conversation separately.
At what point then will the data be populated so that the commentary can be meaningful?
I believe I have most of that in. The other data.
right, we're just waiting for we're going to wait for your comments back by February 28th. Then they'll populate the final data and your additional comments. So then, as Keith indicated, we're required by HUD to have a 30-day public comment period, which should be almost a finalized document. There might be a few blanks, but it should be pretty well finalized. And then after that 30-day comment period, Keith will make the final changes. We'll have a public hearing before a neighborhood open meeting again, so that we can obtain final comments from the citizens, and then we'll have a public hearing before council and hopefully adoption at that time. So it's going to be another 3 to 4 months before we have final approval of both the consolidated plan and the analysis of impediments. So we just need your input on making that document to a point where we can get it out to the public. My name is Darlene Brandt, and that email address again is dbrandt, BRANDT, ci.oshkosh.wi.us. And if you have any questions or would like to talk to me, my phone number is 236-5029.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.